presentation.
Thank you, Clara. So, yeah, just to get started, if you go to the next slide, please. Just a little overview of what I'm going to cover. So, yeah, a bit of a whistle-stop tour of everything. Some success stories from the UK and abroad, and also some examples of reinvestment alternatives that some funds have looked into. And then, yeah, a bit of information about the Day of Action and how you can get involved. Next slide, please. So, yeah, basically just to set the scene in terms of where we are currently, as I'm sure you're all aware, the fossil fuel industry is currently making billions in profits while we continue to pay the prices, like both actively through the costs of our energy and the effects of the climate crisis, which is affecting, us here and places all around the globe. The energy crisis is a fossil fuels crisis, and we're paying for the choices of governments and the finance sector to keep us hooked on expensive fossil fuels and delay the transition to clean, cheap energy. And of course, we see our government taking action potentially to give the green light to new oil and gas fields in the North Sea, such as the Rosebank decision, which is imminent any day now, as far as I'm aware. So we basically need to see an end to the extraction of oil and gas if we want to curb global warming and secure a livable future for everyone. And that is possible if we make the changes we need. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of what fossil fuel divestment is, or what divestment broadly is as a campaigning tactic. So divestment basically means the opposite of investment. So it means getting rid of stocks, bonds, and investment funds that are unethical. And it's been used by a range of different campaign groups on a range of different issues. So the idea behind divestment campaigning is that if we can convince our institutions to divest from a certain unethical sector or industry, they're publicly breaking their ties, delegitimizing the industry on the world stage, and that this will then have the impact that we need to see in terms of political action. So we've seen that obviously happen with the tobacco industry famously. All of the social pressure to divest and dissociate from the tobacco industry because of the harm it was causing has now led to very stringent rules and regulations and public policy on smoking and tobacco, which, so we know that it's an effective tactic. It's about unlocking the power of finance to create political change. And obviously the South African apartheid campaign from back in the mid-1980s, which was initiated by students, led to, create a lot of support for basically for the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and Desmond Tutu has since expressed his support for fossil fuel divestment too, which is great. Next slide, please. So just a quick reminder of sort of why divest and why fossil fuels. So we know that the agenda of the fossil fuel industry is not compatible with the survival of our planet as we know it. So unless all of the coal, oil and gas production currently in operation is retired early, then emissions from existing projects are going to push global temperatures way past safe limits. So that means that we can't open any new fossil fuel projects and we have to phase out the existing ones. Unfortunately, no fossil fuel companies are planning to do that on the scale that's necessary. Equally, fossil fuel divestment campaigns are a really great way to bring justice into our climate campaigning, because it allows us to take local action that actually has a global impact. So we can demonstrate global solidarity for those that are affected by the actions of oil and gas companies, and also not only just demonstrating solidarity, but actually revoking the power of those industries and damaging the power of those industries has a tangible effect in lessening the impact that they can have in other places around the world that are being most affected by their actions. Next slide, please. So these are just some examples of, I guess, when people sometimes respond to the issue of divestment in saying, you know, we need to engage with these fossil fuel companies. They're going to be the leaders in the transition. We need to help them go faster and further in, you know, decarbonising their products. This is just some examples of, you know, the information that we have and we know about the fact that fossil fuel companies aren't going to change. So we've recently uncovered the decades of denial in terms of ExxonMobil and others covering up the truth and misleading the public. And that's been followed by decades of delay. So the millions of pounds and dollars spent lobbying governments against climate action or suing them for taking climate action that has impacted on profits, appealing legal challenges, and then continuing to use greenwash to overemphasize their green credentials and try and sanitize their image so that they can continue business as usual. Yeah, next slide, please. So I guess, yeah, the success story is that the divestment movement is growing, and actually in the UK, we're seeing another little boost at the moment of more institutions committing and more people taking part, not just in terms of pension funds, but also targeting financial institutions too. So globally, we've had more than 1,500 institutions making a divestment commitment. If you go to the next slide, please, that's just some examples of some of the global commitments and some UK commitments, which includes over half of all universities, 5 local government pension funds, lots of different healthcare institutions, and pension funds, yeah, and a whole list which yeah, is available online. I can share the link in the chat afterwards if people want to access that. And if you go to the next slide, please, Clara. I wanted to talk very briefly about a couple of examples. So one being an example from the UK, one being an example from overseas, and then also, yeah, to talk about some of the positive reinvestments that our local council pension funds have done. So I want to start by talking about Waltham Forest. So I guess broadly, as I mentioned in the introduction, we work predominantly on local council pension funds. They are one of the biggest targets in UK divestment campaigning generally, predominantly because, you know, there's one in every area. There's lots of local employees that, you know, have pensions that are connected to that. And so it's an issue that is actually deeply felt and understood by people. And even if you aren't working for the local authority and it's not your pension, everyone pays council tax. And so there is a sense that there is a bit of collective ownership over what that money does and where it goes. Currently, our most recent estimates for the UK is that there's around £10 billion invested in fossil fuels. That's from research we coordinated in 2021. So yeah, that's kind of the scene in terms of council pensions. So Waltham Forest is a great example because it's the first, definitely the first of the local government pension schemes to commit to fully divesting from fossil fuels. But I think it may also be the first, may have been the first pension fund in the UK to actually fully commit to divesting from fossil fuels back in 2016. And that was a result of grassroots activism from local residents and workers. And Waltham Forest has also been the first of the local council pension funds to commit to say that they finally sold off the last of their investments. So it continues to be a great success story for our campaigns. Next slide, please. And then I wanted to speak about another great example, which is from 2021, which is when we saw one of the world's biggest pension funds make a really strong and public commitment to divest from fossil fuels. So ABP are the Dutch pension fund for Dutch civil servants and teachers, so represent a huge number of workers. And as a result of workers and climate activists coming together to put pressure on the fund actually came out with an incredible statement, which essentially said, we don't actually have the capacity, even as one of the biggest pension funds in the world, to change the nature of this industry. And we're going to actually use our limited resources to actually focus on what impact we can have as sort of engaged shareholders with other sectors, because essentially the fossil fuel industry has no hope. So yeah, that's a really, really powerful statement, which I think a lot of the local government campaigns here have used with their funds, because if one of the biggest pension funds in the world can't change the fossil fuel industry, then what hope does, you know, a very small pension fund in the UK have? So yeah, it also has been great because it led to a bit of a domino effect in the Netherlands. So we ended up with the Dutch Healthcare Workers Pension Fund then also creating a bit of a public announcement around divesting from coal. They also committed to stopping investing in any new fossil fuels, and they also committed to divesting from a longer list of oil and gas companies. So they haven't made a full commitment yet, but have gone quite far. So yeah, that is a very powerful and positive story. Next slide, please. And then these are just some examples of positive reinvestments. So I'm not going to read all of them out, but you can have a look in more detail when the slides are sent round. Essentially that it is possible for our pension funds to invest in great things such as community regeneration projects and community-owned renewable energy, solar power plants, hydro, electric power, onshore wind farms, lots of different things, and also social housing and sort of local infrastructure. So yeah, very sort of long list of things that we can also point to as well. So yeah, and sorry, I just also wanted to say on that these are also all, in terms of thinking about the finances, these are things that also will continue to provide a great return for the pension fund. And so there is a financial incentive to do good with your money and still do good with, you know, the climate and the planet and your community. And I think I have my next slide, which is probably maybe my final one, I can't remember. But yeah, this is about the Day of Action, which Clara's mentioned a couple of times. So we're basically encouraging anyone who is currently involved in the divestment space or wants to get more involved to take part in our Day of Action on the 24th of March. So we're going to be calling on councils, pension funds and financial institutions to divest from fossil fuels in sort of a range of unique and interesting demonstrations taking place across the UK. The sort of messaging and theme for this day is around divesting from crisis and investing in our future. So the reason why we've kind of chosen that is to make clear that this is a justice issue, to make clear those links between the energy crisis, the cost of living crisis, and the impacts of the climate crisis, and looking at the root problem of what that is, which is the crisis of fossil fuels that we have. And also to kind of present this choice for investors and financial institutions that you can either continue to support crisis and to invest in crisis, or you can actually invest in something that creates a livable future for everyone, including potentially your fund members as well. So groups are doing all different sorts of things. We have around 30 actions planned so far. People are going to be trying to make visible that kind of dichotomy that is available to funds, including there's some street theatre that's going to be happening where people are going to be doing a tug of war dressed as sort of positive investments on one side and negative investments on the other. We have the climate choir, which is going to be going into central London to sing to some of the biggest asset managers that are investing heavily in fossil fuels. And we're just going to have a lot of groups also sort of creating some really interesting visual stunts that they're going to be taking pictures outside their pension funds and things, you know, dressing up as fossil fuel CEOs and covering themselves in fake oil. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what everyone comes up with. So yeah, I think just to finish up on that, yeah, we are hoping that this is going to be a really good moment with where we are in terms of the winter we're coming out of and the impact that's had on people. and kind of giving voice to what government inaction to transition away from expensive fossil fuels and towards cheap and clean energy is actually having on people, particularly as we're going to be coming up to seeing another record-breaking round of quarterly profits for all of the fossil fuel companies. And I'm sure that will come with a bit of a renewed energy, whether or not the energy price cap is lifted or kept as it is. And we're also going to be in the lead up to the May local elections. So it's also another opportunity to try and get our politicians locally to show their support for fossil fuel divestment. So yeah, sorry, I think I've got one more slide, which is just what we're going to be discussing in breakouts, I think, which is essentially you can either join one of the actions that's planned near you and, you know, offer your support as trade unionists to organisers who are already getting involved in stuff, or if there's nothing going on near you, then we're really keen to help you pull something together in the next couple of weeks. Sorry if I overran it all. I was not keeping track of time. That was okay. Oh, you're on mute, Clara.
Thank you so much, Rihanna. That was like, you know, very comprehensive and, you know, very interesting. And we're gonna have a bit of time for questions. If people, you know, have got like direct questions to the presentation, we've got about 10 minutes to take those. So yeah, if you are keen to ask a question, maybe you can raise your electronic hands. And if you don't know how to do that, maybe post in the chat to let us know you would like to come in. But as we wait for questions, I have just reposted the map of for the day of action on the 24th of March. So I'm asking everybody, please, to check if there's an action near you. So when you go, you can decide which breakout room you may want to go. And I can see a couple of questions coming up. And while people are asking questions, Leila is responding, I may also post another couple of links that have been mentioned in the chat. So I don't know if it was Dilys or Mary coming first, but I will go for Mary.
Thanks, Clara. That was a great presentation. Thanks, Rihanna. I did put a note in the chat, actually. I think a lot of trade union members, and I think trade unions are sort of coming back into fashion at the moment. More youngsters are asking questions about what the movement's all about. You know, undoubtedly it's a result of all the strike action, but that's by the by. Obviously, the money that's being invested in these pension plans is partly our money. It's coming out of our salaries, and it's money that we will, you know, need to survive on when we finish work. Can't wait for that. We were just putting our AGM papers together, actually, and I had to do a quick report for our AGM later this month. And I've just made the mention about this. How can it be right? They've got these massive profits. We've got fuel poverty going through the roof, you know. And I posed that question as part of my report. You know, how many members are aware that their money is being invested? It's propping up the fuel, the fossil fuel companies, isn't it? And it's pushing the climate emergency, you know, far more than it might if we weren't investing in those companies. So I have had a couple of members come back to me and they're absolutely mortified that this is happening. They weren't aware, they didn't know. So I posed the question in the chat, isn't this something that trade unions at national level should be getting a grip of? And I think Rihanna had mentioned previously that it's not just the pension fund divestment. I want to know why local authorities, if they've declared a climate emergency, why do they still do their banking with companies like Barclays? Yeah, so there's a big sort of ethical issue there that I think needs to be resolved. And I think Unison, well, certainly Unison nationally are in a far better place to try and do it, because they can hit all authorities at the same time, can't they? That was my point. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And yeah, we need more action at national levels from trade unions. And I've just shared an event in the chat, which is taking place on the 21st in building up the event. And I think Andrew Dobby from Unison, who is like a national sort of role officer, is going to be contributing. I believe like Unison is gearing up to have, more meaningful action. And we certainly want to see that in number of unions. So check your union policy, because the likeliness is your union has got a divestment policy, but they may not be doing much about it. So anyway, thanks for that, Mary. And I'm going to take a couple more people and see if Rihanna wants to come back afterwards. Dilys, would you like to come in?
Yeah, this is just a really basic question, because I don't understand enough about how all this works. But when a business or a pension fund or whatever divests from something, that means it sells those shares. So doesn't they sell them to somebody else? So aren't the shares still, somebody else is still investing in the fossil fuel companies? Is that how it, I mean, how do you actually get rid of the shares so that nobody's buying them? If you want to divest, you don't want to lose money, so you sell the shares to somebody else, don't you?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Do you want to come back directly on this one, because it's an important question? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think Steve's dropped something interesting in the chat, which is essentially, if a share if companies are being sold regularly on the stock exchange, I think it suggests that they're not really, doing very well. So a pension fund is a long-term investor. If they retain their investments in something, they're a good investor to have on side, whereas the kind of investors who are going to buy these shares when they're sold off on are sort of like private equity firms, which, if a company has a lot of sorry, I'm not explaining this very well. If a company is kind of being sold regularly on the stock exchange and is also being bought by private equity firm things, then it's, it's a bit of a black mark on that company. It's not considered to be very good, but I think the other kind of additional thing to say is, like I was saying in the presentation, is that the power of a divestment commitment is kind of the public statement in saying it's not necessarily about the money itself, and that's kind of a vehicle for having the sort of public statement of an institution to basically say, we think that this industry causes harm and we refuse to support it any longer, and then that has the political impact of demonizing the industry essentially. So I don't know if anyone else is more of a finance head and may want to add anything in the comments, No,
thanks for that, Rihanna. Roy, would you like to come in next?
Thank you, much appreciated. I won't put my camera on because I look a bit of a fright. I've been out for a run.
That's fine, no worries.
I was just interested really in the pragmatics of the alternatives for investments that we're going to be looking at going forwards. I hate that phrase. Don't know why I used it. But we do need to think a little bit about what alternatives we are now investing in. And I was interested in what Walthamstow were doing, to be honest, as well as a side issue, what they're now investing in as an alternative. But it struck me as well that there was a really good example of a lost opportunity recently, when the company, I think they were called British Volt, who were going to set up in Northumberland in the northeast, and couldn't do so because they lost access to government investment because they couldn't raise the funding to build the company in the first place. I think I've got that right. If I haven't, I apologize. And I just feel like that's an example of one of those lost opportunities to diversify into different industries that are going to be much more ecologically supportive, is a phrase. I don't really like that phrase, but it feels like there was a lost opportunity there to invest in a company that could produce for us some inroads into a new green industry. And I just think we should be putting pressure on our MPs now to make this an issue, that we are losing opportunities to invest in pensions through such companies, such that they cost us our pensions. So we need to be making that link between industry and pensions much more consistently. And I just think that's a way of creating some pressure on the government, and also as well for Labour to have a bit of a voice in the argument as well. And I don't know what people think about that. I might be off beam with my thinking on that, but I'd be quite interested to know what people think about that, to be honest.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I'll just say something briefly and then I'll bring Rihanna back in, but not all pension funds are actually invested in the market. And I used to be a civil servant for 15 years. And actually the UK civil service pension is not invested anywhere. It's basically just come in governments and come out of governments, and the government is, you know, backing it. So, the sort of like situation that we are stuck in now, that we even like see, oh, a pension has to be invested on the market, I think is, something we need to, look out of, because our pension shouldn't be gambled with on any market in a way. But if it comes back to sort of like public funds that can then be invested into positive and sustainable industry and schemes, then that's something that's worth doing. Rihanna, did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I will try my best. I think that's a really good point, Roy. One thing that springs to mind is that the government in the Levelling Up white paper last year announced this 5% target for local government pension funds to reinvest in the local community. So that's kind of like potentially a leverage point for us to use with our funds around trying to make sure that when there are sort of startups and things like that within the local area that need investment, that it's the kind of thing that our funds should be investing in, particularly where it's clear that there will be like a good return on that investment too, if it's, something like renewable energy, which obviously people will need and use. I guess the other thing around Waltham Forest's investments, I'm not 100% sure with Waltham Forest specifically, but I guess the trend has moved away from investing individual stocks and shares to investing in these kind of diversified investment funds, which will contain lots and lots of different companies on the stock market. And that kind of that's a trend which is towards protecting, by not having like loads of money in one thing. It's kind of you've put your money in one fund and then it's spread across a lot of different investments. But that does mean that sometimes they create these sort of low carbon funds, which actually, when you look into them, are not very good at all. So there is kind of a follow-up to be done around any of the funds that are kind of saying we're putting 100 million into this low carbon fund, to then look into it and be like, actually, does this contain loads of horrible stuff that's actually not very positive at all? Or, does it exclude fossil fuels but continues to invest in lots of other horrible things that we wouldn't want our fund investing in? So yeah, just a thought, but yeah, I don't know specifically on Waltham Forest.
Thank you so much. And yeah, so thank you for everybody who asked a question. Thanks for Rihanna for sharing your thoughts. And we're gonna now move on to the second part of our briefing. But first of all, I wanted to propose that any trade unionist in this call who is keen to keep in touch about divestment, maybe share resources or chat about union policies or action we can take in our workplaces beyond the 24th of March, I've created a WhatsApp chat that I'm sharing now in the Zoom chat. So you can join it directly, but I will also circulate it after the meeting so we can keep in touch, share experience, give each other tips, etc. I think that would be great. Okay, so as I said, we're going to move on to the second part. I'm just checking for time. We've got about 20 minutes for that, 15-20 minutes. And is there an alternative to WhatsApp? Not at this stage, but I'm sure we can discuss that on WhatsApp. Sorry. Okay, so now we're going to hear from a couple of trade unionists who have been involved in divestment campaigns, or are involved into the divestment topic in their unions. So first of all, we've got Jason from Unison Northwest Climate Emergency Group, and then we'll have Leila from Equity for Green New Deal. So if you want to just be like, yeah, a few minutes, 5 minutes maximum to tell us about your experience, that would be great. And then we may have time to take a couple of other people who may have campaigned on pension divestment before. So
yeah,
Jason?
my name's Jason Hunter. I work for Unison. I've worked for Unison for 25 years. Before that, I was in a factory, an engineering factory. I was a convener where we made gas boilers. And if I was still there, and to some extent when I was there, we were arguing that the company should invest in different things to secure the future of the workers. So the way I see climate change is it is a trade union issue. Unions exist to protect workers, but there's no, we can't protect the workplace in isolation from a collapsing climate. So it is a union issue. It's about members' future. It's about making members and their families more secure. Now, the pensions are definitely part of that. And we formed a climate emergency group 2 years ago. We meet once a month. So it's people from all over the Northwest, which stretches from Carlisle to Crewe and Pendle to the Wirral. And we've actually had a group called Fossil Free Greater Manchester speak at one of our meetings. And we have 2 members of our group who were actually involved in the pension fund in Greater Manchester. And Greater Manchester is the biggest offender, I think, in this respect. But they find it very difficult to get any progress or to get they're not really like advocates who are representative and are able to discuss it. They shut down in so many ways when they raise these things. And there does seem to be a lot of defensiveness. We have been involved in campaigning before. We have been outside, and the event will be outside the Greater Manchester Pensions Board. And I think Unison have a position, and I have a document here which I don't know if it's visible because of that light, but it's a document, Local Government Pension Funds Divest from Carbon Campaign, a Unison Guide. And this is actually, and we passed a motion a number of years at our annual conference. I think it's important to understand where we're coming from, because we believe that 80% of the carbon has to stay in the ground. So in the long run, those investments have to fail. They are going to fail. And our pensions can't gain money from investments in things that can't be used. That's the logic. But we have to argue it in that sense. We couldn't, for example, say we don't care whether the pensions survive because we do care about the pensions. We want our members to have good pensions and they paid into them. So we're arguing it from that particular angle. But we do believe, for various reasons, it will be the case that fossil fuels will become less and less profitable. There will be more regulations on them from politicians. They won't be able to sell as new products, like as electric vehicles come on the market. Petrol won't sell. As heat pumps come on the market, or insulation, there'll be less market for gas. So these investments are bad investments in the long run. A complication is in the short run, they're making money hand over fist because of the blood of the Ukrainians, and it's incredible that, you know, the government haven't done more to sort of make them control their prices and make less. These are windfall profits that are being given to dividend holders, and they should be invested in the future of this country, but they're not. So I mean, we take a strong view on this, and I mean, there's a number of people on this meeting tonight who are involved in our group who could just as easily have said what I'm saying. But it is something that we care about passionately. But we do have to win our members. The mere fact of the way it happens, it isn't that thousands of members march on conference and demand that the union does something. It's largely people looking ahead and putting forward ideas about the future, which result in a motion being passed, and then we have to take that out. We have to take it into the branches. And we have to convince people to actually do things, and we have to do that. For example, this day of action. I mean, at the moment, the pay talks, there's pay talks going on, but if they fail, we will have a big health day of action that week on the Monday. So that'll probably be where the union's main resources go. But that doesn't mean that others of us can't focus on this day of action. So we will be circulating our local government branches. We will be trying to get people there. It is, of course, a working day, so it's not massively easy to get people to do, but nevertheless, that's why it can't be the end of it. It has to merely be part and the start. So I think I'll leave it at that, but thank you.
Thanks so much, Jason. And in the chat, I've posted a couple of documents. One lists the actual Unison motion from 2015 conference, but also a trade union Congress motion that dates from the same year. And briefly mention divestment at the bottom. I encourage people to check out the document, and if you are aware what your union policy on divestment, I will be very grateful if you can, post the motion text or link to it, or even your name and contact, so I can follow up with you, so we get a bit of a library of policies, union policies on divestment. And the second document I posted is the divestment guide that Unison had produced, which is really useful as a campaigning tool. So, obviously for Unison members, but also for any activists to have a look at. So yeah, thanks so much, Jason. And I'm hoping that a number of Unison members will come on the 24th. But as you say, this is, not just about the day of action, but the ongoing sort of mobilization of members, getting new people on board with this campaign. And I think the day of action is a great opportunity to link up with climate justice campaigners who campaign on divestment, and for them to be able to dialogue with workers and build those alliances, because this is how we're going to win on climate justice, is by widening the movement, building alliances, networking, coordinating, and working together. So thanks so much for that. And yeah, if anybody from Unison wants to know more about the climate emergency group, I mean, this is for the Northwest, but hopefully there are similar groups that are going to spring up in other parts of the country. So next, I'm going to bring Leila from Equity for a Green New Deal with a slightly different experience, because it's been about divesting your own union pension funds. And I know that my union PCS, I've been doing some work on that. So it'd be great to hear from you, Leila.
Thank you so much, Clara and Jason. That was, yeah, really, it's so exciting hearing the different ways that people campaign. And yeah, and as Clara said, I'm from Equity Union, which is, if you don't know, a union for stage managers, directors, actors, creatives, and across the UK. And about 1 million years ago, it feels like, but 2015, a group of us wanted, as inspired by our local borough divestment campaigns, across the country, realised that, hang on, what is the pension fund that we are invested as union members? And we shamefully, I think Mary, you said the union, the hot stroke summer is really exciting for young people, and I think shamefully that was our first branch meeting, was going, maybe we should go to a branch meeting and find out what's going on here. So divestment was actually our way into the union structures at that point, about 5-6 years ago, and to try find out where our funds were invested. And we realized that basically, without boring you too much, Aviva are our pension provider, so they invest on behalf of our union. And we realized that they were investing in, the drill, the drilling companies. So we passed local branch motions, and then finally got it up to council, our equity council, who voted on it to support our campaign and pushing for that to be divested. Because we're, as so many workers are, but particularly in the creative industry, low paid and financially insecure is what Aviva called us. It was very hard to have those conversations, because we're not our employers are left, right, and centre. There's not a consistent payment going in every month. But after a few different tactics, which I think lots of you have done as well, either launching the event publicly, trying to get it into the national newspapers, because one silver lining of being in a bonkers industry is that you can have relatively high profile people talking about pension funds in a way that pierces through. So we launched an event where we got Mark Rylance to talk about the pension fund and why it's that yeah, you can't sort of say we're a union that's supporting climate change and then simultaneously have this going on. And so yeah, we were trying to make it as a public discourse as much as possible. And then 2022, Aviva agreed to move the money to a low carbon tilt, so green tilted fund, which we were obviously happy about. But as I think, Rihanna, you were talking about it, they're a dicey thing anyway. So we're really excited that's the beginning step. But as of actually today, we're hoping to hear that we might be able to move to a fully divested default pension fund. They're really unsure about it, but we're hopefully hearing in the next few weeks. And if that's the case, what we really want to push for is that this is would be the first union that has got a divested default pension fund. It might not happen, so I'm saying this to 30 people and it might not happen, but we're hoping that if it doesn't happen now, we'll keep pushing for it. So yeah, and the last thing I'll say is that as a result of the divestment work, we've been able to go to local branches, equity branches, and talk about it, and then through other different campaigns that have been happening, build a group that are focused on the workers' rights and climate justice and climate change as a sort of cohesive ambition with our group, which is equity for a Green New Deal. So we've sort of spread out our campaigns from beginning with a divestment campaign, but looking at how we can create theatres more sustainably, or how we can basically push for more robust sustainability within our industries. So yeah, so that's that. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Sorry if I just rambled.
No, thank you, Leila. It was great to hear from your experience and what your group have achieved. And I have to say that actually talking about climate justice issue, whether that divestments or other issues, can be like a recruitment tool. And I know that as a union rep in the museums in Liverpool for years, I had like many young people in particular joining the union because we were doing stuff on climate justice, which is like quite interesting. Not necessarily the first entry for a trade union that you can think about, but it does actually encourage younger workers to join. Okay, we've got another like few minutes before we go to the breakout rooms, but I'm just wondering if somebody here that I've got experience in getting involved in divestment campaign would like to share maybe what you've been up to, or any of the actions or protests or lobbying that you've been up to. So I'll just see if anybody would like to share their experience, and if no, we'll move to the breakout room. But I've got Elaine, Unison Bristol. Would you like to come in, Ellen?
Yeah, just very briefly. We haven't done any exciting actions up to now. Hopefully the 24th we will be. It's just been sort of really quite laborious, going to committee meetings whenever we can. That does mean taking a half day or a quarter day off work, but so it's not easy, and not everyone can do it. But going along to committee meetings, if it's a public sector pension fund, it'll be posted just like any other council committee meeting, and it'll be the same rules about submit your questions 3 days in advance, tell us if you're turning up. And the first time we turned up, they looked at us and they said, we've never had anybody here from the public in all the years they've been meeting. And that was quite a few years ago, and they get us almost every quarter now when they have their committee meetings. Committee rather than board meetings look for, because that's the one that's you're more likely. Just ask awkward questions, just keep digging. Don't worry if you don't really understand all the details, just ask the simple noddy questions. Why are you burning the planet? And maybe take a motion to your union. Just again, think of anything. It's almost just to get attention, just to get a little bit of publicity, just to get people in the union noticing and asking what's this about. So yeah, that's what I'd suggest.
Brilliant, Irene. No, you're right. There is also the sort of like boring part of the campaigning, which is about the lobbying and the committee questions, etc. But a very important one, because unions have got representations on those boards as well. So sort of approaching the union representative on those boards can be like quite important. I believe Unison's going to roll out some training in the next coming 12 months as well for members, but also for reps on those boards. So thanks for sharing. And I've got Mary next.
Yeah, just following on from what Elaine said, and you've just pointed out that certainly for Greater Manchester Pension Fund, Unison does have seats on the pension board, but very much there as observers more than anything else. And I know they've tried to ask the questions, but they get the usual, what's the word? Is it fiduciary duty to, yeah, to make sure you get the best return on investments for members, and it's the same old. And I just think, you know, which parts of climate emergency do you not get? It's, you know, just making that link just seems to be so difficult for them. Yeah, we've had a lobby, I think, outside the. Did they meet monthly, Jason? Jason will know, but we've been lobbying outside the premises where they have their pension board meetings for quite a while now. Hopefully there'll be a massive turnout on the 24th though, so you know, we'll take it from there. But of course, these, if you read into it, these pension boards, if you like, that are made up of all councillors from different authorities, what have you, they obviously have advisors to advise the board, don't they? And that really is all the information they've got to go off is what they get from their financial advisors, you know. So I think perhaps there's the need to find out who exactly is advising your pension fund board and start asking questions of them as well, because as far as I'm concerned, some of the advice that the pension board's being given is pretty duff. That was my point.
Thank you so much, Mary. And I've got a couple more people who want to come in. I'm going to take, so John and then CC120367. But I'm going to take John. Oh, John has disappeared. So I'm going to take you, CC12.
I'm still here, Clara.
Okay. Okay. So John, if you want to go in first, and then we'll take CC1203.
Thanks, Clara. John Pye, I'm a Unison member and member of Manchester Trades Council as well. And I've been attending some of the meetings with the Fossil Free Greater Manchester campaign group. I just thought it was worth making a point to follow on from what Mary and Elaine had been saying, which was that from the research that I've been trying to help with, that the Fossil Free Greater Manchester group has had to do into pension funds, particularly the local government pension scheme funds, they are actually all set up in slightly different ways. So maybe the one at Bristol, which I guess is perhaps wider than just Bristol, I don't know, but yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's full.
Might be set up with a committee, yeah.
Yeah.
The Greater Manchester one has a sort of committee that's got a majority of councillors from one council. South Yorkshire has a completely different structure where the South Yorkshire local authorities have set themselves up as an independent legal sort of joint committee of councils. And I know the ones are all set up slightly different ways with different voting rights for different people. So you actually need to investigate your own local one to take action and try and figure out exactly what its decision-making structure is. And that can take some time if they are not exactly, well, put it bluntly, they're trying to hide. They're trying to hide what they're doing. And so you've got to be, you know, have to do some real detective work to try and get behind it and sometimes and work out exactly who has the power and which meetings you need to get to and how you get to speak and so on.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much, John, for your insight. And I've reposted the WhatsApp group to keep in touch. So it'd be quite good if, you know, some people have got more experience that they can join as well. So if people are newer and they're looking for advice, we can, you know, support each other. Okay. Sorry, I can't see your name, but do you want to come in next?
Yeah, sorry, I've logged in from work, so it's got my work number in. So sorry, I'm Lindsay from Shropshire. And I sit on the committee as a Unison member. I don't have a vote, but it gives you a good kind of like insight and training in pensions and how to fight for divestment. So then you can build up allies with people on the committee, and it's so worth it because you feel like we're getting somewhere, but we still have all the same arguments that all of you have, but I would urge people to get to be represented on the committees. The boards are slightly different. They kind of like are supposed to advise the committees and have more kind of like knowledge of the financial side of things, whereas the committees are kind of like councillors who don't always have the greatest knowledge. And for Shropshire, we're kind of like, we're the authority that manages the pension. So we have the team there that advises the committee. And usually, like the other person said, for years and years, they had absolutely nobody coming along. And then now they've got Fossil Free Shropshire and Unison and Unite having a good go, but it's still a struggle. That's all I have to say.
No, thank you so much. And I'm sure that after the day of action, we can also, do maybe have a follow-up meeting when we can hear more about those committees, but also look at, any other resources or training that we may need. So yeah, I'm now gonna stop the recording.